Hello everyone, welcome to another video on Maple Street. And as a way of introductions, welcome back to another year of HALEoween. If you're unfamiliar with HALEoween, it is the word Halloween, but it's spelled a little differently, so my name's incorporated into it. And it's basically a time for me to just talk about horror movies, horror TV shows, sci-fi, thrillers, all that spooky stuff. So I'm no stranger to talking about Twilight Zone on the channel. It's my favorite TV show of all time. I've seen all the episodes, many of them more than once, twice, 3 times. I love the TV show The Twilight Zone, and when you're that attached to a TV show, especially one as iconic as The Twilight Zone, it's a little hard not to think about it and associate it with other movies you're watching. In today's video, I want to talk about 8 black and white movies that, in my opinion, could work as an extended Twilight Zone episode. Now, as you could imagine, this means a lot of things. I mean, the Twilight Zone isn't only horror or only sci-fi. There are a lot of episodes that have nothing to do with either genre, but are simply a message about mankind, man's true nature, the lesson of virtue, what you do when people aren't around you, what you do when you're placed with a hard decision to make. There are so many life lessons learned from the Twilight Zone, and so the movies I address today, you'll see a little bit of a mixture of, yes, maybe horror movies or thrillers, but also sci-fis or movies that really get you thinking, that have a deeper message going for it. So the first movie I'm talking about today is The Oxbow Incident. This movie is from 1943. It's directed by William A. Wellman. Basically, it follows a small town. There is suspected murder as well as thieves. So the town creates a large posse and they go out to who they suspect are the suspects of these awful crimes. They discover 3 men that they deem guilty of the crimes, and basically the movie is whether or not they are going to hold a fair trial for these 3 men, or if they're going to choose themselves, let's get rid of them right now, we can sentence them to death because we as a people agree that this is appropriate. Henry Fonda is in it. I'm a sucker for Henry Fonda. He is great in these good guy roles. He's on the side in the movie of like, wait a sec, this is not right, we shouldn't be doing this. This reminds me of a lot of Twilight Zone episodes. I can't nail down one episode in particular, but it's that common message the show dealt with, where what does mankind do when they have so much power available? The Oxbow Incident 100% belongs in the Twilight Zone for the messages it has and also the questions it makes you ask about yourself. How would I act in this situation? What would I do? And even beyond that, would I be brave enough to speak up to the people with the loudest voices? My next movie is Dead of Night. It is from 1945. It has several directors attached to it, so I'll let you look that up for yourself. And it's actually a movie that I gave a shout out to last year in my 8 great black and white horror movies video. Dead of Night is a horror anthology film. It presents several spooky tales and it connects all those tales into one greater story that's happening outside of the anthology. But the first story is called The Hearse Driver, and this to me felt exactly like the Twilight Zone episode 22. It's basically about this lady who keeps having this reoccurring dream while she's staying in a hospital. In this dream, she continuously makes her way down to the hospital morgue, and every time she makes it there, the doors are swung open and a nurse tells her,
"Room for one more, honey."
Obviously, she's implying you're going to die. That's how the episode goes, and the story within Dead of Night is very similar to that. As I was watching it, I even looked up on the internet if there was any inspiration for that episode from this short tale. Beyond that tale, though, there are several other stories within this movie that have little characteristics of what make a Twilight Zone episode great. There's a mixture of mystery, horror, sci-fi, even comedy. With all of it together, I think it makes for a great Twilight Zone episode. The next movie I'm talking about is a little known flick called It's a Wonderful Life. That's a joke because it's my favorite movie of all time. It's a Wonderful Life came out in 1946. It was directed by Frank Capra, stars the great James Stewart. Why am I telling you about this movie? You all know about it. The reason I think It's a Wonderful Life makes a great Twilight Zone episode is for the last 40 minutes of the movie. You're aware of the movie. George Bailey has a chance to see what life would be like if he had never been born. That within itself feels like the Twilight Zone. We've even seen episodes in the Twilight Zone very similar to this plot. But beyond that plot, I think It's a Wonderful Life has even more going for it, especially on topics that aren't really discussed with the movie. For an example, there are some great eerie shots in It's a Wonderful Life. I remember the first time I ever saw it being taken back because I wasn't expecting eerie shots in a happy Christmas movie. Plus, the movie does not shy away from talking about serious themes such as suicide and depression. The Twilight Zone also didn't shy away from these serious, mature topics. On the surface, It's a Wonderful Wonderful Life is a fun Christmas movie with a really good message to all mankind, but if you dig a little deeper, I think it totally deserves a spot here in the Twilight Zone. The next movie I have to present to you is The Setup from 1949. This movie was directed by Robert Wise. The movie follows a boxer. This boxer has a history of losing his fights, and because of that, his boxing manager, he doesn't have confidence in him. In fact, so little confidence in him that he's actually betting against his own client, his own boxer. He is betting with some gangsters that his boxer will lose the fight. Well, when his boxer comes out victorious, it leads to a few problems. The Setup has a runtime of 73 minutes, and one thing that I find unique about the movie is that it all takes place in real time. The events of the movie happen in a 73-minute period, and because of that uniqueness, it feels deserved of being in the Twilight Zone. But also on top of that, the story of someone that you think is your friend betting against you, and also just the shadowing and the dark nights and the grittiness of living in this neighborhood where crime is happening and betrayal is present. It also has quite an impactful ending, and I feel like this ending is something that we would see in the Twilight Zone, where it happens and you're just sort of left speechless. It's such a short movie, it basically is a season 4 episode already, with the season 4 runtime being an hour. It just feels like it was crafted and manufactured in the Twilight Zone. Next up, we're jumping ahead a few years to 1957. I am talking about 12 Angry Men, directed by Sidney Lumet. This, like It's a Wonderful Life, is no stranger to you. I'm sure you've seen the 12 Angry Men, or at least have heard of it. I want to highlight how special this movie is. Picture with me a courtroom where a young man is guilty of the murder of his father, and every single juror but one agree that he is guilty. But then as the movie continues forward, one by one, miracles start happening. The jurors start to see the case from new lenses, from new perspectives. They start to get an idea of, wait a second, maybe this kid isn't guilty. To me, that story of seeing a shift in opinion, that's why it belongs in the Twilight Zone. Because somewhere in the Twilight Zone, this tale exists. These 12 men are brought together to decide the fate of this young man, and because they're in the Twilight Zone, a miracle happens, and that is the stubbornness goes away and they're able to see with clear eyes whether or not this kid is guilty. Yeah, it's not presenting any sci-fi elements or any horror, but it doesn't have to. This message alone and the interaction between the different jurors, it deserves its spot in the Twilight Zone. All right, for the next movie, we are shooting forward 1 year to 1958. I am talking about The Defiant Ones, directed by Stanley Kramer. This movie is about an African-American man played by Sidney Poitier being prisoner and handcuffed to a white man, Tony Curtis. Together, they are two prisoners. They are being transported to a new location, but along the way, the transport bus gets in a crash. Long story short, they escape, they're on the run, but the kick of it is they are still handcuffed to each other, therefore they can't lose each other's sight, and neither one of them are very fond of the other person. This movie has a lot to say about racism, racial differences, but I love the idea that it could happen to two black men, it could happen to two white men, but because it happened to a black man and a white man, and especially at a time where racism was at large in our history, that's what makes it stand out. That's what makes it feel like a Twilight Zone episode. Specifically, the Twilight Zone episode, The Encounter, which follows a Japanese man played by George Takei, actually, if you're a Star Trek fan, getting trapped in an attic with the white man. Both of them have bitterness towards each other because of the history of World War II, and they're trapped together in this attic. Neither of them can leave, and they're basically forced to come together and work out their differences. Now, it doesn't go the same direction as The Defiant Ones goes, but that idea of two sides, two different parties just really hating each other and being forced to be stuck with each other, it really resonates with me, and to me it builds a great story. I think it's an amazing Twilight Zone episode. I think The Defiant Ones is an amazing movie, and so yes, it earns its spot in the Twilight Zone. These last two movies have kind of an interesting kick to them. They were both written by Rod Serling, and so it's a little biased. I mean, that speaks for itself why it belongs in the Twilight Zone. I still want to give you my reasons beyond it being written by Rod Serling. So the next movie is from 1962. It is Requiem for a Heavy Heavyweight, it was directed by Ralph Nelson. It's about a character. He is a boxer. He hasn't had the best winning streak in the last few years. He's kind of a has-been at the end of his career. In fact, it's very similar to the setup where he is a failing boxer. His manager doesn't have faith in him and therefore is kind of betting against him. Very similar plots, but the movies go in two different directions. The reason I highlight Requiem for a heavyweight and add it to the pool of Twilight Zone movies is because it's a very bleak movie and it belongs in that category of Twilight Zone episodes that are just sad. You don't watch them for a happy ending. You watch them to see a very well done story with great performances and a great ending, a hitting ending, and all those elements are present in Requiem for Heavyweight. It's a sad movie and I wanted to highlight it not only for Rod Serling, but also to me, the bleakness of it just reminds me of something that you would find in the Twilight Zone. And the final movie I want to talk about today is Carol for Another Christmas. This movie came out in 1964 and was directed by Joseph L. Mankiewicz. And again, like Requiem for a Heavyweight, this was written by Rod Serling. And oh my gosh, this might be the most Twilight Zone episode of the entire list. It feels like any minute in the movie, Rod Serling is going to walk onto the screen to give an opening monologue or a closing monologue. The movie is a modern day telling of A Christmas Carol, as you could probably imagine from the title. But because it's a modern day telling, I mean, modern as of 1964, it's no longer focusing on, you know, the events of the original Christmas Carol with Ebenezer Scrooge. It has similar characteristics to that original story from Charles Dickens, but it is creative with what it does with those characteristics and allows you to see what happens to this man who's visited by the three different ghosts that we're oh so familiar with from the Christmas Carol. Each visit that happens with the ghosts is very memorable and very powerful. There is amazing dialogue written. I mean, can you see why I'm saying it belongs in the Twilight Zone? The movie's message really hits home with the story of mankind and just the weakness of mankind, what they do when they have too much power, and the effects of that power and the current situation of too much power. And on a side note, I would love for this to get a Criterion release someday because the only copy that I know of is a video uploaded to YouTube. So on the bright side, you can watch it. It's on YouTube right now. Those to me are 8 movies that belong in the Twilight Zone. There are plenty more. In fact, I have a whole letterbox list of black and white movies that belong in the Twilight Zone, but these 8 specifically felt especially good to talk about. Maybe in the future I'll do another video, we'll see. Let me know what movies to you belong in the Twilight Zone. I would love to hear, and explain your reasoning too. Don't just give me a movie because it's black and white and there's a robot in it. Like, you know, give me a reason. Why do you think it belongs in the Twilight Zone? I want to hear it. I want to see these movies too. They're movies I haven't seen. I'd love to discover them. Thank you all so much for watching and stay tuned for more HALEoween videos coming to you this month. Have a great day.